Hello. I'm looking off into the dreary morning twilight. And what do I see? A horizon line, of course. Distant trees way back there. Did you see them? Let me show you again. See back there, beyond the greenhouses, beyond the field, those dark gray, fuzzy treetops. That is the most distant feature in the landscape that we see out of the art room window. In a landscape painting, many possible features could make up that distant horizon line. It doesn't have to be dark gray trees. It could be a purple mountain, or a beautiful paradise ocean seascape, or it could be trees. Nothing wrong with trees. Let's see what it looks like to add some distant landscape features onto our sky. Let's get started. For this nighttime scene, I'm imagining that this moon is casting its light down on some mountains. The first step to painting mountains is to mix up the base layer color for those mountains. For my mountains, I'm going to go with a relatively dark purple. Now, if you had a daytime sky, you could choose a much lighter color. You could choose a light brown, a gray, but you do not have to choose realistic colors. These mountains, for example, are going to be purple. So I'm going to start by taking a few dips of blue and red. I'm going to mix that all together and add just a touch of black because I do want these mountains to be a little bit darker than the sky itself. Now that we've got our color, let's paint this mountain range. I'm going to scrape up some of that paint onto the edge of the palette knife. It's important that you load the paint right up on the edge of the palette knife. That will allow you to scrape your mountains onto the paper with precision in one fell swoop. I'm going to start on the right side and work up, really focusing on the horizon line, the top edge of those mountains, making sure that that line is crisp and neat. If you start to get a fuzzy or faded line for the top edge of your mountains, they're not going to look jagged and sharp, they're going to look soft and fuzzy. When you use up all your paint, load up your palette knife again, and repeat the process until you have a mountain range that suits you. Once you've scraped on the base layer of your mountains, pull that base layer down by either scraping some of that extra paint down the page and or use a brush to pull down and fade those mountains into the base layer, the sky layer of your painting. By fading the bottoms of the mountains into your painting, it'll make the next layer overlap and work with those mountains more easily. As you do your landscape painting, you'll find that there's a rhythm to the process. You'll paint a base layer and add texture, and then paint another base layer and add texture to that. The base layer of the sky gets cloud texture. The base layer of a mountain gets a rocky texture or a snow texture. So I need to mix up another color to give this mountain a snowy, rocky texture. I'm going to make this a very light color, like it's snow or a bright light being cast from the moon. So I'm going to use a lot of white paint, a little bit of that purple from the sky, some yellows and blues to green it up just a little bit to give it that light from that yellowish, greenish sky and moon, but still keeping it very, very light. Before I scrape this layer onto the mountains, I'm going to think about where the light would hit the mountains because I want this to be like light reflecting off snow. So I'll load the palette knife up, and then as I scrape that down onto the mountains, I'm going to scrape it down onto the sides of the mountains that face the moon. You'll want to have a little bit less paint on your palette knife for the texture on your mountains than you did when you did the base layer. And then as you scrape, use a lighter touch, just very lightly. Let that palette knife scrape down one side of the mountain. Sometimes as I scrape, I'll actually purposely even lift the palette knife up and then let it touch down again to give breaks and big gaps in the snow to create really dramatic shadows and rocks on the mountain. You do not want to cover your base layer up completely. You want to have plenty of that darker layer showing through. If you have small little peaks, you can just use the small edge of the palette knife there to get into those. And in that valley, I'm not going to put down very much snow because I want that to be a dark valley in the mountains. And that looks pretty good. I think these moonlit mountains are done. So let's take a journey. A journey to a place where the sky is blue, the clouds are puffy, and there's a nice ocean horizon line hanging just below those clouds. And to paint this ocean, I'm going to start by mixing up two colors. The first color, I need to be a darker color. Your ocean doesn't necessarily have to be blue, but I'm going to go with the traditional colors here. So I'm going to use a nice blue. I'm going to make this darker ocean color also have a little bit of yellow in it, just to give it a slightly blue-green ocean look and to separate it from the blue of the sky. After I paint my dark ocean color, I'm going to go over to the other side of the plate and make a very light ocean color. I'm going to use blue-green again, but this time I'm going to add white to it to make it that nice aqua color, like the crystal clear blue-green waters of the Caribbean. There we go, that's the color. Now we're ready to paint this ocean. So I'm going to clean the brush, and then I'll use the medium brush with that dark ocean color, and I'll paint the horizon line. Painting the horizon line is a little bit tricky because you have to be very neat and make sure that this is a dead straight line that goes from side to side on the paper. I like to make a couple practice brush strokes. Sometimes moving your hand kind of quickly from side to side can end up with a straighter line than if you go painstakingly slow. So I'm going to kind of plan out that straight line. And then once I've got a straight line planned out, I'll go in and kind of fill in with that dark color. Not letting this get too thick and globby because this is water and it's far away from us, so a thinner look will be better. I'm not using any water, but I'm just layering on a thin layer of that paint. Taking extra care to make sure that the horizon line, the top edge of that water, is very straight and very neat, not fuzzy or curvy at all. Once you've got the horizon line painted, you can relax as you fill in the rest of the ocean with that darker blue color. Bring that darker blue color down about an inch or two, and then just allow it to kind of fade into the sky color. Then get your light color. Paint that right where the dark color begins to end, and then brush back and forth, allowing that light color to blend in with the darker color and fade. Don't allow it to cover it up completely, just blend it in. Brush back and forth as you get these two colors to blend, left to right, not up and down. Up and down brush strokes can cause one of the colors to take over. We just want a nice balanced blend. And then as we go down the page, we want it to eventually change into that nice blue-green color and allow that darker ocean color to disappear completely. Bring that lighter ocean color down to about an inch or two before the bottom of the page. You don't have to bring it all the way down because we're going to leave some room here for sand or palm trees and that kind of stuff. The base layer of the ocean is now complete. So the next step, some texture. The texture of the ocean is light reflecting off waves. Just little ripples. We're not creating any big waves. That's an up close thing. We'll do that later on. We're just thinking distant textures, just light kissing the top of the water. So to paint that, I'm going to take a few dips of white with a very small brush. This is by far going to be the most detailed thing we've painted yet, so use a very small brush and be prepared to be detailed. You don't have to use white paint for this, especially if you have a sunset sky. You should use the colors of your sunset, and it'll be a really good look. Regardless of your color, you're going to load a small brush up with just a little bit of that paint right on the end of the brush, the very tip. We're only going to paint with the tip of the brush here. We're not going to be painting with all the bristles. To get the look of ripples on the ocean, we're going to make very thin, side-to-side brush strokes on the right towards the horizon line, towards the back of the ocean. The lines towards the back of the ocean, these are the farthest away ripples, so they should be the thinnest, but also the closest together. As you work your way down, the lines can get a little bit further apart and a little bit longer, but they should stay very, very thin. After you've brought this texture down for a couple of inches, you can have some of the waves get just a little bit bigger. These are still distant waves. They're not close. They're not crashing, but just some longer ripples that maybe even come up into a little bit of a peak. Don't overdo it, but if you just have a little bit of a point at the top of some of these ripples, it can look really good. Using just a little bit of white paint, not overdoing it, to form one side of the wave or the ripple, and angling down just a little bit on the other side. If these waves start to stand out too much, you can always go and add a little bit of the blue-green paint back in, kind of fade them in, maybe even use your finger to help them fade. You do not want these waves or these ripples to look unnaturally bright or thick, but just little subtle white lines on top of your base layer that fade in a little bit. And you'll have a really nice texture to the ocean. That light just bouncing off the little ripples in the water. Beautiful look. What a paradise. If any of the ripples are standing out too much, you can go back over them with a clean, dry brush and just fade them in just a little bit, pushing them back just 1 degree to make them look more natural. And now we've got a finished ocean, so let's go to our final location, a sunset forest. Below this sunset, I'm going to imagine that there are some distant trees, just like we see when we look out the window of our school. Distant trees, maybe at the edge of a field, but I'm not going to bother with the field yet. I'm just going to bother with those trees themselves. And these trees are so distant that I'm not going to be able to see any detail in them. No branches, no trunks, just kind of a bushy, leafy texture. So just like the ocean, I'm going to start by mixing up 2 colors. One is going to be a very bright lime green, a nice springtime tree color. And the second color is going to be similar, but a little bit browner. I'm going to add some red in there to brown up that green just a little bit. It doesn't really matter what 2 colors you use as long as they're different. A brownish yellow and a lime green yellow, a dark green and a light green, a dark blue and a purple. Any 2 colors can work. Once I have those 2 colors, I'm going to clean my brush and dry it off very well. A clean, dry brush and also a large, flat brush, just like the brush I'm using here, is going to be very important for getting this texture. And that's because this texture comes from the very tips of the bristles. Make sure they're separated, kind of fanned out a little bit, so that we can see the individual bristle tips when you create this texture. You only need to load up the paint on the very end of the bristles, just tapping it onto the plate like that. And then begin tapping your distant forest, your distant trees, right along your painting, making sure that it overlaps with the previous layer of your painting. The shape of the forest and the tops of the trees is up to you. You could have some trees be taller, some trees come down, a little patch of shorter ones, and just make it look natural. And be light when you do this. Don't press the brush down too hard or you'll ruin all that texture. We want to see that little bristly, light texture. And with the first layer of this texture done, I'm going to clean my brush and make sure I've got my bristles ready to put on that second layer. And add a little more yellow to that to make sure it's bright enough. And then I'm going to just very lightly dab that paint onto this forest. I'm not going to cover up that first layer completely. I'm going to use this lighter layer to be where the sun would hit the leaves, but I'm going to allow that darker layer to show through. This is going to give a really nice, realistic, leafy, soft look to these trees. Don't overdo it or touch your brush down too many times. If you dab your brush 100 times onto these trees, it's actually going to make that texture disappear. So easy does it and know when to quit, and you will have a beautiful, soft forest that could perhaps be at the edge of the field or at the far end of the forest. This is going to be a great landscape painting when we add those other layers on. But we'll have to wait until tomorrow to do that, because now it's time for you to grab your brushes and paint that distant horizon landscape feature onto your painting. Let's get started.